Hello and welcome back to week 5 of the Azure Landing Zone weekly questions. This week it's just me. We've got a number of folks out travelling and attending some conferences this and next week, so you've just got me today. However, we have plenty of questions to answer, and today we are going to tackle the question of how should we approach expanding our platform landing zone to additional Azure regions. So this is quite a common question we get a lot from customers, where they want to expand their Azure landing zone or their platform landing zone, part of the Azure landing zone, to support additional Azure regions. Maybe they started off in one region like UK South, and now they're looking to expand that to some additional regions for resiliency reasons, for capacity reasons, for many other reasons that people look to expand and grow and take on more regions, which we recommend by default is the right approach. Actually, in the Azure landing zone architecture, we actually show in the diagram 2 regions by default for your platform landing zone, and out of the box in all of our accelerators we'll deploy to 2 regions by default, unless you change that and turn that down to maybe a single region, just to get you off on the best start possible, because we do recommend that as a best practice, as a starting point. That's not to say it's 2 and done, it's 2 as a starting point and move on from there. Some of you may decide that 1 is enough and 1 is fine, and that's suitable to your needs. However, we would always recommend a multi-region architecture for most customers. So let me show you some of these places where we talk about it in the doc. So let me just share my screen. And first of all, we'll just start at the main what is an Azure landing zone page. Let me just zoom in here for you. So as you can see in this diagram that we talk around, if I just show this, we've got 2 regions shown here in the connectivity subscription anyway, right? So we show multiple regions here, and we're saying N because this could be multiple other regions. We obviously don't show that many in the diagram because it's big enough and messy enough as it is, and also fitting it into the Visio would be a real hard work for me and the team to maintain. But we do show multi-region by default, and obviously your application landing zone subscriptions also showing that multi-region, connecting their various virtual networks for whatever region back into the respective hub virtual network. And this is obviously for a traditional hub and spoke architecture, but it's very similar for virtual WAN, where you just have an additional hub in those other regions where you want to expand to, and the virtual WAN will configure all of the routing for you there. So we talk about and show that here, right? And we suggest that you start with multi-region by default. However, we also have guidance as a separate page in the table of contents, that if you go under the enhanced section, you'll find this landing zones regions page, and you can get to this page in a short link by going to aka.ms/alz/regions, and this will bring you to this page that we're on now, which talks about how we use regions in the Azure landing zone, so how you should think about them from the platform perspective. And then also we've got a checklist of how do you add a new region to an existing landing zone? Like, what do you need to think about from an architectural perspective when you're going through that multi-region strategy? And we've got this nice little table here to help you think about, the various areas that you might be concerned about. Like, quite often we hear from customers like, expanding to another region is going to take us a really long time. There's loads of work to do to the platform landing zone, all of this sort of stuff. Now, realistically, I want to break that myth. Like, the only thing that there is really to do is to expand the networking elements of that. So deploy an additional hub into the additional regions that you want to expand into, deploy firewalls, set up your routing, configure VPN gateways, express routes, all of those sort of things. Obviously, express routes can take some time working with your telco providers to get those circuits provisioned and certainly connected back into wherever you want them to. But you could reuse existing express route circuits that you've got today if they're not using a local SKU, or maybe you can if that local SKU covers the regions that you're expanding to for where you've deployed that circuit, and then you could expand to an additional circuit in that region for additional resiliency when you get to that point in time and when it's ready to provision. So it's very easy to do, and if you're following our best practices of using infrastructure as code, and if you've used maybe the Azure Landing Zone Accelerator with Bicep or Terraform that we provide, you'll have all of this code ready to rock and roll. So it should be a copy and paste exercise of like expanding a parameter input or a variable input, changing some names, setting the region, and effectively doing a plan or a what if, and then deploying that or applying that and seeing it come to life, right? It should take care of itself. It should be very easy to expand. And then from your management groups and your policy perspective, there's nothing really to do there, right? Like, you might need to adjust a policy if you've got some policies in place that restrict the regions that you're using. especially if you're a customer that's got some sovereignty requirements, you might need to adjust that policy. But again, you're just adjusting a policy assignment parameter, or maybe updating a definition if you've hard-coded some of those values. So very easy to expand and very easy to do. And obviously, if you've got identity services like Active Directory domain services, you might want to expand those into the additional regions to give you the best resiliency and best reliability chances. Should a region have an outage, that might be one of the reasons you're expanding your region. But this is all down to you, and we document this quite succinctly here. So have a little look here, and we also obviously recommend using availability zones wherever they're possible if they are available in the regions you're expanding to. So yeah, lots of good guidance here. We then provide like some high-level approach on how you should approach this for both the hub and spoke, the virtual WAN, from an identity perspective, and then you might want to move bits and pieces around, or you might want to have some regional landing zone resources. So quite a lot of documentation here that's been updated by many of our colleagues across the field and people working with customers on a day-to-day basis. So lots of great guidance here, so I'd highly recommend going to check that out. So with that, I'll just take that off the screen. As you can see, we have provide quite comprehensive guidance on how you should approach expanding your landing zone into additional regions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the landing zone should really start with a minimum of 2 regions for your platform landing zone as a starting point. Now I just want to sort of change tact a little bit, because there is quite a lot of concern sometimes around that networking element. Like, it might be that you need to deploy an additional third-party NVA. You don't use an Azure firewall, for instance. You might use something like a Palo Alto or a Cisco appliance, or any of the other security NVA appliances that are out there in the marketplace. And obviously they may come with additional licensing and additional procurement processes that you need to go through, and that will add time, obviously, on top of just deploying those resources from an infrastructure as code perspective. Now that's absolutely understandable, and for some customers that might take months. And that's obviously not ideal, and hopefully that's something that you can all work on and improve those processes to make that faster if you need to do those things. But there's another architecture that I think I want to just pose to the community to think about as a mid-term step if resiliency and reliability is not your primary focus from a BCDR perspective, and it's purely about, hey, we need to expand to another region very quickly to get some capacity to do this new project because that service might only be available in that region right now, or we have another requirement for just doing a POC, and that region might be cheaper from a cost perspective because of the SKUs that are available there and how that data center is priced up, or how that region is priced. So what I would say is, think about from that networking perspective, instead of deploying that full hub again in that additional region and connect it up to your other hubs and all the complicated routing that you'll need to factor in there, and obviously the additional cost of all those resources like express routes, VPN gateways, firewalls, potentially additional licensing, all of that stuff. If reliability and redundancy is not your primary driver and concern here, and it's purely about getting access to the latest services and just using those in the regions that are available right now, and you're happy to take the risk of, we don't need the full-blown deployment of the exact platform landing zone in every region we go to, you could take advantage of global VNet peering, right? And you could just deploy an additional application landing zone subscription for that new use case, or it might be using an existing one that you've already got. But you could just then deploy another virtual network in that region of choice. You might need to update some of the policies in your platform landing zones management group hierarchy that you've got assigned if you've got some region restrictions on, but that's a very quick, small change and non-breaking. So you might need to just put that in, make that change, then allow that new VNet in that new region to be deployed, and then you can peer it back to one of your existing hubs in any of the Azure regions that exist already today in your existing platform landing zone setup. So you may only have, let's just say you've got a region in UK South and you've got one in UK West, and they've both got hubs and they're both connected to each other, and they've both got the full suite of connectivity hub resources like firewalls, VPN gateways, all of that stuff deployed. But now you want to expand, I don't know, let's say to Sweden Central, because you want to consume some of the latest AI models that might only be available over there. And you're not really concerned from a reliability or resilience perspective for your overall applications architecture and that end-to-end uptime SLA and metrics that you're measuring and tracking against. What you may then choose to do is just deploy an additional VNet into a new or an existing application landing zone subscription in Sweden Central, and then peer that back to either your UK South or UK West hub, or maybe both if you want to, right? Just that you can get access back to those resources, and then you're off to the races, right? You're off and running, and you've got unlocked the business. They can go and achieve what they want to achieve, and you haven't had to spend the additional money of spinning up an exact replica of your connectivity hub in that additional region. Now, over time, that might grow, and you might put more services and more application teams start using Sweden South, or Sweden Central, sorry. So what you then might decide to do is, hey, okay, we've got a justification now of putting an additional hub out there and improving the resiliency and reliability of that region and for those applications that are out there. And then you can just flick the VNet peerings when you're happy to in a small outage window, and you've then justified the cost of that existence and expanded in a nice way. So I don't think you have to think about deploying the whole thing every time. There are certainly, like, if you were to ask us from a Microsoft best practice, of course we're going to say you should do the most resilient, most reliable, most secure, most performant architecture following the well-architected framework. However, that's guidance, and if you know that you don't need all of those things for this particular use case that you're doing, it might be a POC, it might be an application that doesn't require a very high uptime or anything like that, or you can afford to have an outage should be an issue going back through one of your existing hubs in UK South or UK West, like we just used in that example. Then there's no reason why you can't take advantage of global VNet peering, right? And I think that's a really interesting thought, and something I want to push back on the community to think about in terms of expanding your landing zone. Often gets caught up in this networking hub space and the cost and additional licenses if you're using third parties and all of this stuff, and express routes and telcos. Think about just using the native platform services that exist inside Azure, like global VNet peering, to help you unblock some of these and deliver value to your business and application teams. You can always add them on later, and you can always re-architect. That's the beauty of the cloud. It's super flexible and meets you where you are. So, doesn't mean because you've made that decision now, it can't change in the future. So with that, I want to leave you with that today. That's today's question answered. As always, we are always looking for more and more questions. So please feel free to log more for questions here at aka.ms/ALZ/questions. And again, that guidance that I shared earlier about the regions was aka.ms/ALZ/regions. And my final ask to you all is, if you like what we're saying here, hit us up in the comments, let us know what we're saying about potentially not expanding using all the deploying all of your platform hub networking into that additional region for certain scenarios. And if that's something you're going to find useful, then please do let us know, because that's something we will consider documenting and putting into our guidance, obviously with the caveats around reliability and resiliency, etc. But with that, we'll see you next week, and thanks again.